The Cummins Valley is located on the west slope of the Rocky Mountains. It lies 120 kilometers approximately northwest of Golden. The Cummins is a very long valley on the western slope of the Rockies, approximately 24 kilometers in length. And what makes it unique is that practically 16 kilometers of that length, it doesn't rise above 100 feet in elevation, which means that it's a very slow and moderate descending river valley throughout much of its length. The actual Clemenceau ice field, which feeds the Cummins, is made up of a very spectacular grouping of peaks and glaciers. I've been fortunate enough to travel to the Cummins Valley now over the past 15 years as a professional mountain guide with both ski touring parties and mountaineering groups. And there is just no question in my mind as to what a spectacular region it is, and it has a real special type of environment. I think one of the questions that I've often been asked is as to the canoeing potential of the Cummins River itself, and I have no question that the canoeing experience there would be tremendous. Ultimately, I would like to see the area protected in its natural wilderness character. To use it simply right now to meet the short-term needs shows a real single lack of vision for what the area truly stands for.
The Cummins Valley is unique in the Central Park Ranges in that if you look at most of the valleys in the Central Park Ranges, they tend to be composed a lot of strips of timber intercepted by avalanche tracks. The Cummins River itself is very unique in that it tends to be a U-shaped valley versus the V-shaped valleys you see up in a lot of those drainages. And as well, it probably has one of the largest intact forest old-growth ecosystems that exist up there. And it provides connectivity through the Athabasca Trail, and it also has fisheries values in the lower reaches. And it also picked up an interior cedar hemlock subzone variant, which is provincially significant. Riparian habitat is not only productive to the wildlife that live in the area because they are tremendously productive and diverse habitats, it's also extremely productive for fisheries in this area. We lack inventory to create a comprehensive list, and what tends to happen is you tend to look at larger species that are more visible, easier to inventory, and extrapolate from there other species based on habitats. But in terms of a knowledge of the smaller species and mosses, lichens, those sort of things that exist there, almost non-existent.
I guess it's important too that when we look at the Cummins that we realize, because of its size again and its state of naturalness now, that it does form an integral component to the protected area strategy. From a biodiversity potential, we obviously recognize that the rainforests in themselves have very high biodiversity values. There just aren't that many examples of intact interior rainforest areas in this region, and Cummins being one of the few remaining. The parks, as we've seen from things like the gap analysis done, are overrepresenting certain biogeoclimatic zones. From the ecological side of things, we can certainly see that the national parks, having the major highway and transportation corridors running through the middle of them, certainly accounts for a large amount of impact, and parks are finding now that a lot of our ecological components are suffering because of the high level of human use. If we're looking at numbers within the core reports, then it's indicating that 16.5% is protected. While really, to meet protected area goals, we would have to net out those areas in national parks that the ecological values are really compromised beyond providing biodiversity values. There's a real component out there that are seeking true wilderness type experiences and opportunities, and that's something that parks are having an increasingly difficult time in providing, and something like the Cummins is a unique area in that it can provide those types of opportunities.
What we have here is a map of the Golden Timber Supply Area. The Cummins drainage, which is right up here in the northern portion of our district, roughly occupies 2% of the working forest. So of the green color on the map, the working forest, the Cummins is about 2%. That crosshatching refers to what we call problem forest types, which is usually hemlock leading stands in the Golden Timber Supply Area. Historically, in our area, the amount of logging on these problem forest types has been relatively less than other types. These have usually been thought of as a tougher economic situation for timber harvesting companies.
One of the most important reasons to protect the Cummins is that the quality of forest in that valley is such that the ecological values far exceed the timber extractive values. Most of that wood will never make it to a mill, not even for pulp. A lot of those ancient trees will end up being ground under the wheels of machinery. There will be a degree of waste that I believe is totally out of sync with the kind of society we have become. The only inventories that have ever taken place in the Cummins have been inventories of the wood resource. We know almost nothing about biodiversity in the Cummins because of its very remoteness. Stephen Owen, the Commissioner of Resources and the Environment, in his East Kootenay Land Use Plan, wrote this about the Cummins. He said, "The argument for protection of the Cummins is strong. The watershed, which is complete and large enough to be viable, is one of the last undisturbed complete watersheds in the area. It provides highly productive riparian and old-growth habitats, and it would contribute significantly to seriously underrepresented ecosystem types, particularly at low elevations. The upper portion of the watershed is spectacular, with twin lakes joined to the Clemenceau ice fields by majestic waterfalls. Designating the entire river would protect the area's exceptional high recreational values for deep wilderness experience." The Golden Forest District is a heavily industrialized area. We have compromised most of our natural spaces. Keeping the Cummins Valley in a natural state allows us to provide a benchmark to future generations. We've already made most of the significant decisions on our land base. We have very little left to hand down to future generations. Logging an old-growth forest is like burning a library before you've read the books.
It wasn't all that long ago, probably 1950s. This was a very different part of the world. Most of the area to the east of what was then the Columbia River, undammed, was Hamber Park, 2.5 million acres. It was one of the finest wilderness parks anywhere in the world. And then in the early 1960s, with one fell swoop, Hamber was decimated. Now it's a tiny speck compared to what it was. And now, if we are going to hand on a remnant of what remains, the only thing that remains intact of all this tremendous area, which was once all wild, magnificent, and preserved, the only thing that remains is the Cummins Valley. We don't have wet belt Rocky Mountain. We don't have rainforest Rocky Mountains at the low elevation. This is our last chance to protect some Rocky Mountain rainforest. Over the last 30 to 40 years, people have been working very hard in the East Kootenay to try and regain or hold on to some of the remnants that still remain. When we save Cummins, we will be handing on a treasure, something so special that our children and people who come after us will have the same chance to thrill to the wildness and the beauty of the big trees in this majestic part of the Rocky Mountains. I can't imagine that we could do anything but save Cummins. If we don't act quickly to save Cummins, we will have nothing left of the low elevation Rocky Mountain rainforest to pass on to the future.